So this record comes in at number 37 on Best Ever Albums, top albums of the 70s. It was ranked number 5 in 1970, 147 overall, and this one actually does come in at number 85 in Rolling Stone's top 500 albums, so breaking the top 100 there. The record was recorded from September to October of 1970, and it was released on December 11th, 1970, which was also the same day as Yoko Ono's album, also named Plastic Ono Band.
How confusing.
Yes. Well, technically, this album is named John Lennon / Plastic Ono Band. And
can I go out on a limb?
Ono's album is Yoko Ono / Plastic Ono Band. Yes, John, go ahead.
Can I go out on a limb? I bet you Yoko Ono's was not as good.
It was not.
Okay.
There's a song, I did listen to it for, I don't know, probably longer than I should have, but it's a lot of screaming. Actually, credit to her, the music actually isn't too bad. It also includes George Harrison playing the sitar. And so the music's actually, but she's just in the background. The first song is called Why, and the second song is called Why Not? And in both songs, she's just screaming, Why? Why? That's all it is. It's unreal.
Avant-garde.
Yes, sure. All right, so the record was co-produced by Lennon, Ono, and Phil Spector, and this is Lennon's first solo album. So I think, Josh has the John Lennon picture up. He's going through all the backgrounds. He had Led Zeppelin, and now he's got John Lennon.
I need to start pulling up the Zoom, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. You do. So I think in order to really understand and appreciate what's happening in this record, we need to go back all the way to when John Lennon was a child. Because
we don't have that much time for the bio, Matt, so keep in mind.
Well, yeah. Listen, it's a little bit of that, right? So John Lennon, his parents his mother gave birth to him in 1940, and his father really was kind of absent from the get-go. He was a merchant seaman during the war and was kind of off, always, out of the picture. Lennon's mom was kind of a free spirit. Her older sister, Mimi, saw her as someone that wasn't really fit to take care of John Lennon. She actually called social services on her twice. And one of her main complaints was that John Lennon's mother, Julia, allowed him to sleep in the same bed with her and her boyfriend. And I don't think that they were sleeping all the time with young John Lennon in the band. So Julia, relented. She decided to allow the aunt, Mimi, to raise John Lennon. And she was much more of a rule follower. She was very strict. So John Lennon was kind of raised in a more, a structured environment. So there was a moment where John Lennon's father came to reestablish a connection with him and tried to emigrate with him to New Zealand. Julie would not allow it. And, so there was some infighting going on there, but there was a lot of other family drama, which culminated with his mother actually being killed by a car. Car ran into her, driven by an off-duty police officer in 1958 when John Lennon was 17 years old. And this was absolutely devastating to him. Even though he wasn't being raised by her, she still would visit him and Mimi often at the aunt's house. She taught him how to play the banjo and was really into music. She was a very free spirit, and probably Lennon got a lot of his personality from his mother. So this was a big, a traumatic event for Lennon. And it's one of the things that led him to, after the breakup of the Beatles, to have him start engaging in primal therapy, which was created by a man named Arthur Yanov. And it's been since discredited, but the essential theory is that you have to, relive childhood trauma and experience it in the moment as much as you can. And then you essentially just scream, do a primal scream and to really address the trauma. So Lennon and Ono undergo this primal therapy after the breakup of the Beatles. They do it for about 5 months, but they have to stop there was some sort of issue with a visa. So they had to stop doing it. Yanov later said that he felt that this was a disservice because he really needed at least a full year's worth of treatment since his trauma was so bad. But Lennon, instead of continuing with the treatment, goes into the studio and he records this record. And in the recording of the record, you could hear a lot of pain. A lot of the subject matter here does have to deal with the abandonment that he felt from both of his parents for different reasons. It has to do with his renouncing religion and not just from different gods or structured or organized religions, but also from, like artists like him and McCartney and the Beatles, people that revered them. There's a lot of talk about his isolation. One of the songs on here is called Isolation. And it's a lot of pain. It's very raw. It's very minimalistic, very different than what some of the stuff that he was doing with the Beatles, which got much more experimental in the studio. But essentially, this is just him, with a guitar, sometimes a piano. Ringo's playing drums on this, so he does get Ringo here. And the bass player is a guy by the name of Klaus Voormann, who was a friend of Lennon's and the Beatles from the Hamburg days. He's also the guy that designed the album cover for Revolver. And Yoko Ono is credited as backup vocals and also, quote, winds. So any wind that you hear in this record is created by Yoko Ono, apparently. During the recording, he also reunited with his father on his 30th birthday. It did not go well. His father later recounted the encounter by saying, quote, he launched into an account of his recent visit to America, and as the story unfolded, so the self-inflicted torture began to show in his face, and his voice rose to a scream as he likened himself to Jimi Hendrix and other pop stars who had recently departed from the scene, ending in a crescendo as he admitted he was bloody mad insane and due for an early demise. There was no doubt whatsoever in my mind that he meant every word he spoke. His countenance was frightful to behold. Ringo and Voormann also noticed his erratic behavior in the studio. Ringo later said that he was not the same John in that recording session as he had come to know during their time with the Beatles. And finally, after the recording of this record, I wanted to include this in here. Lennon and Ono fly to New York to work on a film called Up Your Legs Forever. And the description of the plot of this avant-garde art film is that the film depicts panning shots of 367 human legs from foot to thigh. The film is 70 minutes in length and ends with a short shot of Lennon and Ono's buttocks. So that is art. Josh, should cover that. I have
not seen that.
You should cover that for Josh's Film Corner.
Oh,
70 minutes of thigh of legs.
It definitely sounds like something playing in an art museum.
Yeah, it's somewhere.
Patreon exclusive.
Lennon did view this as his best work up until that point. At one point during an interview with Jan Wenner from Rolling Stone, calling it Sergeant Lennon. The album did struggle to find radio play, and Lennon was angry that George Harrison's All Things Must Pass was getting more recognition and was selling better, so he was kind of resenting that. Overall, the reception was mixed, but it's also considered now to be his best solo work. And correct me if I'm wrong, fellas, but is this the first time we're hearing someone use the word fuck in an album?
I definitely noticed that. I think it is. At least, on our
I couldn't think of one. And he uses it twice. Right. Yeah. And so obviously that song that's on Working Class Hero, and that was banned, of course. So there you go. Plastic Ono Band. Let's start with Josh. What do you think?
So I had not heard this album before, and if I had heard songs, I feel like they are distant memories, or I never found out who they were by or anything like that. So I went into this thinking that it was going to be really weird, and because he was with Yoko and kind of all the stuff that was going on with their relationship, that maybe it was going to be more like what Matt described the Yoko Ono album as. So I was really surprised when I heard this album, and it is really good and really catchy, and I guess I should not have doubted John Lennon in terms of his writing ability. This is kind of like Beatles extended universe sounding music. It's Lennon Unleashed. I'm glad you gave me the bio on that, because clearly he had a lot of unresolved issues, and those are definitely present here in the songs and the lyrics. I definitely picked up on that. Songs like Mother, it's very dark. He's questioning everything, and songs like God and I Found Out, things like that. He gets a little experimental. There's some random thing in Hold On where he yells cookie, I think, at one point.
That he was mimicking Cookie Monster is what I read about that.
Okay. Yeah, that seemed out of
I don't
nowhere.
know why, but he just threw that in there. So
we also got bomb explosions, a familiar trope from many other albums that we've talked about. Is that song Remember about the Guy Fawkes explosion? because he says remember the 5th of November, Guy Fawkes
I don't know.
Day. Okay. Maybe so. That's a British holiday. So it's about Guy Fawkes tried to bomb Parliament at one point I think it was in the 1800s. But yeah, especially the front half of this album.
Yes, Josh. Yes. I'm seeing Guy Fawkes in here. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Guy Fawker.
I really like the front half of this album more than the back half, although I think Well, which is on the back half, reminds me of like a Beatles song. It's a little repetitive, but it gets in your head as well. And Look at Me also sounds like a Beatles song. But Mother, Hold On, I found out, Working Class Hero are really great songs, and they're just really well-crafted compositions. They're dark, but timely and also kind of timeless as well. I felt like this album holds up really well and could be side by side with anything that's modern in terms of kind of this solo singer-songwriter outfit. Have some of these songs been covered by other people? Because I feel like
Sure. Oh, yeah.
like Mother and Working Class Hero, I may have heard from some other person and not.
Well, there's a whole tribute album called Working Class Hero. That's a bunch of like 90s artists, like Sponge is on there, right? like stuff like that. So, but yes, I mean, nothing comes to mind. I mean, I know this album for the John Lennon versions. So, but yes, there's been many covers of a number of these songs.
Know them from their John Lennon versions as well. But I really like his guitar playing and his piano playing on this. I feel like it's really interesting to see this kind of transition from the Beatles. I never thought about all of them as solo artists after the Beatles. I've always grouped them as the Beatles. So it's interesting because, you know, back in Norwegian Wood and Rubber Soul and Help, you know, going to that darker kind of space, and this is like the culmination of that, and him without the other people to you know, he's himself on this and no one else, clearly. So that was really interesting. I really appreciated this album. I really liked it, was really surprised by it. All
right, John.
Yeah, I really like this album too. I wasn't super familiar with this album. I knew bits and pieces along the way. A couple takeaways from this which were fascinating to me. This album is stripped down, like you mentioned. I think but it's also immaculately produced, which makes sense because like Phil Spector did it, right? But this doesn't sound at all like what you would expect a Phil Spector album to sound like, because it's not in any way, you know, very over the top or with different sounds and, you know, blast through, right?
Well, it was co-produced too with Lennon. I mean, it says Lennon. I'm sure he was in. I don't know how much Yoko did, but she's credited too. But he wasn't fully in charge.
Oh yeah, but what I'm saying is you would expect it to sound a certain way, right? And it sounds really crisp, like really crisp. But I don't know whether Lennon was able to dial back some of Spector's, you know, gimmicks and stuff like that. But I mean, say what you want about those Spector albums, they might have had the wall of sound and stuff, which I know you hate, Matt, but they sounded crisp, you know what I mean? And they were designed to basically pop, and this album does as well. So it's kind of an interesting hybrid. It reminds me again that Lennon's my favorite Beatle as a songwriter. The songs here are really good songs. Lyrically, you know, I think sometimes because John Lennon wrote Imagine, you just kind of think like Lennon is a solo artist, like kind of like lost his fastball. That's an easy narrative. And as cheesy as Imagine is, it's kind of an outlier because these are weighty, heavy songs that for a guy as famous as John Lennon was in 1970, it takes a lot of stones to write songs this controversial when you're that much of a brand. And that really stood out to me, the quality of the songwriting. You know, even when he's Working Class Hero is basically like Bob Dylan redux, right? It could have written by Bob Dylan, right? To the point where I'm almost like, okay, that's almost too much of an homage. But you can't argue that, you know, John Lennon did a really good Bob Dylan, better than most people who do a Bob Dylan. And so I think what stood out to me was just how good a songwriter he was, the fact that he managed to do stripped down without going off the reservation. It's experimental, but not, it doesn't lose you. you know,
Right.
and it's arty without being so arty that it gets lost in itself. Before you even told me about the Primal Scream stuff, Matt, I was like, this must be the Lennon and Primal Scream,
Oh yeah.
like period, because yeah, he's like wailing at different parts, and we've talked before about how much we love when like, you know, twist and shout John Lennon just kind of lets loose and like his throat bleeds, right? You know, this is him doing that, but in a totally different way. So he puts that sort of, you know, throat bleeding sound, but more deliberately into the different stuff, and you can hear the pain in these tracks. And it's a real virtuoso piece, and it's a reminder of how talented John Lennon was. And it definitely inspired me to dig back into his catalog, because like Josh said, I think sometimes I fall into that trap of most of John Lennon's best work was with the Beatles, but this was a very fair continuation of the Beatles' legacy with Lennon. Not a lot is lost from what he was doing there to this. And as a first Beatles solo album that we're covering, I give this a good job, John. You were up to the legacy.
Well, it's just so much more personal too than the stuff with the Beatles. It's clear that it's about John Lennon, or you know, things that he's been thinking about, and that's different than his time with the Beatles, I feel like.
Well, and you also feel like I've always felt that like what the Beatles were doing at the end is really more like what Paul wanted. And I think what's interesting to me is when you see this album with Lennon, We're Gonna Do All Things Must Pass, you kind of see the Beatles that felt like they were no longer as much a part of the sound, or had never been as much of the part of the sound. You get to see what their vision of what the Beatles would have sounded like. And I always felt like I kind of had a better idea of what Paul McCartney's was, because that's a lot more present on the later Beatles albums. Whereas with John, you're kind of like, I wonder where he's going. And, you know, with George, it's like, he gets these pockets in, but, you know, what does he have to say? So, yeah. And I will be honest, I much prefer this album, for example, to Let It Be. I would listen to this album plenty of times, whereas Let It Be for me kind of fell flat. So,
Yeah.
What about you, Matt?
So I've actually I've known this record for many years. I've had it for a while, and for the majority of my knowledge of this record, to me it was 4 songs that clearly stood out that I just loved, and I still do. I think it's first and foremost Mother and God. I mean, the way that the way that the album opens with that track, that Mother track, is a killer track. It's just, it is it's like a perfect opening track. And the way that it just builds, and the screaming that he's doing, with the banging on the piano, and the way it fades out too, because you can just hear him going off. The screams that he's doing are like otherworldly, and then God is just like this, another beautiful melody, that's got this interesting bridge part that just keeps going. He keeps repeating things that he doesn't believe in, and then he finally, it's a very stark song. Like, it's like, I don't believe in anything except me, right?
It's
like,
it's super nihilistic.
Oh,
it's super nihilistic.
And then he talks about, I'm sorry, the dream is over. We have to, you, my friends, you're just going to have to carry on. And it's just this like really sad, as a Beatles fanatic, like it's a very sad song, but it's also, you have to appreciate it because it's Lennon just giving his all,
Yeah.
It's a fantastic song. I really liked Working Class Hero for, it's just some of the reasons that John said. And I thought that Love had a really pretty melody to it. So for many years, the rest of this album kind of was okay, right? And I think I found myself listening to it the more, this week, really liking it as a whole piece, and really kind of appreciating what he's doing. This is the album that he, wanted and he needed to make, I think, at this time. But this was the stuff that felt real to him. He would certainly in latter years, kind of condemned some of the songs that he wrote with the Beatles, saying that they were phony, or that they were just, they were ripping other artists off. But the stuff that he always liked the most with the Beatles, like something like Help, for example, that was, or Strawberry Fields, the more personal songs. And that's all this is. And so while I really do like the record as a whole and appreciate how raw it is, it's also for me, it's very sad. Like, this is not a happy, feel-good album. This is the album of a tortured, hurting individual that was losing his mind, you know, and it's just out there, and you have to admire it for his ability to be just completely vulnerable, you know, it being the, you know, one of the biggest stars in the world, to basically saying, I'm losing it, you know, I you know, all the stuff that was going on before, the hippie stuff, that's all BS, you know, and all I got is myself and screw everybody else, kind of, you know. So in that sense, it's very sad. And I know I'm not normally the lyrics guy, but it's hard not to pay attention to what he's saying here.
That's true.
Because it's very easy to hear. First of all, it's very easy to hear what he's saying. It's, you know, it's not like muffled in any type of production or instrumentation. And it's also somebody that I really like. It's one of my favorite artists of all time, you know, and one of the reasons I like the Beatles is because it's so happy. It makes you feel good. And this is not just something you put on to feel good. This is a raw, taxing record, and it's, it needed to be made, and you know, and he really liked it, and it was, you know, I'm glad he did other stuff later on, that he was happier later on. But
well, like Imagine comes right after this, right? Which is very different. Yeah,
that was. I don't know that album that well, so I know we're covering that. That's the other Lennon album that we're covering. It's like a year or two after this, so I'm interested to see how that sounds. But there's, like I say,
it's almost like a counterbalance. Well, with the exception of what's the song about McCartney?
How Do You Sleep?
How Do You Sleep? That's the one that sort of goes back into this, but the rest of it is sort of like the yin to the yang of this.
Okay. Yeah, but songs like that, like Well, and Remember, were songs I thought before this, I was like, they're not there, you know, they're just kind of there, you know, they're certainly not as melodic, you know, it's kind of like a repetitive kind of thing. And Well at the end is him just screaming. You know, I was listening to it once the other night, and Sherry's like, is there like a child screaming across the way? I'm like, no, it's just John Lennon, you know, like mourning his life. And Remember, actually, that he got that riff was an outtake from a jam that they were doing at the end of something, when they were recording something, and that came out of that. So he decided to put that to a song. But the slower kind of acoustic songs like Isolation, Look at Me, those are very pretty songs, really nice songs. Hold On is like actually kind of maybe the most upbeat song on this in terms of melody, but very good songs. And then it just, at the end, it's like 49 seconds, my mommy's dead. Like, it's just, you know, so much pain. It's like, it's like, it's a great album, but it's also just freaking gut wrenching.
Yeah, he's definitely working through stuff on this album.
Yeah. So it will be interesting to hear the other album. I'll, you know, cover more of what happened with Lennon and the rest of his life. But he did do several albums, and but we're only going to cover one more. I think Imagine made both the Rolling Stone list and the best ever albums list. So yeah, thumbs up for me. Sounds like thumbs up from everybody, and actually maybe a couple surprise thumbs up from you, Josh. Sounded like you weren't expecting this.
Yeah, definitely. Thumbs up for me as well.
And thumbs up for me, although I'm not surprised, because as I've mentioned many times here, I always think the Beatles' finest moments are John Lennon's, and so it makes sense that, you know, he'd make a fine solo album.
Yeah.
I mean, I would also have to say, this does not sound like a Beatles album to me at all. You know, I think that there's
moments.
Right.
There's moments.
There's some moments like I think, Josh, you mentioned the Look at Me. I think that there's like a guitar picking that's very like,
I found
Dear
that sounds
Prudency.
like a Beatles song, I think.
I mean, it's hard. It would be hard not to sound a little bit like the Beatles, right?
Yeah. No, there's moments, but like, this is it. I'm hearing, as an overall piece, this is a much different listen for me than listening to any Beatles record. You know,
is that because of how you feel about the Beatles, though? Because
it's possibly
sonically, it sounds similar to what the Beatles were doing later in their, or at least what John Lennon was doing later in the songs he was writing. To me, a little bit, Matt. I think, at least, yeah.
Maybe. I think some of these things definitely sound like elements of later Beatles songs.
Okay. Yeah, it could be like, for me, it's always been a clear mark of demarcation, you know, line of demarcation that this is Lennon, not the Beatles. And maybe, you know, you're also not hearing McCartney, you know, you're not hearing the other elements that were in there. So,
well, you're not getting all the Beatles, like, which
right.
is part of what we talked about that we love about the Beatles. You know what I mean? It's that they have three different high-end songwriters, but yeah, you're just getting John Lennon. But this, to me, You know, like when I was listening to I Found Out, I was like, this could be on the White Album, is the first thought I had when I listened to it. And I was like, yeah. Mm-hmm.